Good afternoon. Great crowd. I'm James Dunlap, Limestone College. I'm going to talk to you today about the Warren Commission. First, I'd like to be able to walk around. That was what I hoped to do. The member of the audience is a former graduate school friend of mine, Richard Gamble. And the only thing I could say was, who knew? Richard and I were at USC together. Richard came to the university as a full-fledged libertarian, but I fell in among socialists there. And I left the university AVD and taught at a private school in Spartanburg, South Carolina, the Spartanburg Day School. And the man I shared an office with handed me a copy of Dan Smoot's Invisible Government. I'm sorry, Dan Smoot's Invisible Government was the book he handed me, my office mate. Thank you. And he handed me a big stack of The Free Market. And I became a convert at that point. So it's been an interesting experience. Now, what interested me the most about the free market idea was the writings of Murray Rothbard, the historical angle that he took. And I decided that what I needed to do was combine a couple of interests. One was an interest in the Kennedy assassination situation and the Rothbardian analysis idea as well. And he basically said this: to assume as an hypothesis that people in government are at least as self-interested as those in other fields, to then examine relationships and connections that you find there, and that if you did so, you'd find revealing patterns within those relationships. And I took that and applied it to some things that I've been working on the side, and I found that it worked, basically. I also decided that I needed to try to either cut through or bypass entirely the enormous body of JFK assassination and conspiracy materials, and especially official government document releases and that sort of thing, and try a fresh approach. And what I found was that there was a lot of information about the Warren Report itself, but very little about the Warren Commission or the individuals on the commission. And that's what I decided to try to look at. I also determined that since I was in a position where I was in a small town and a small college library, that I would try to find this information, if there was any, through readily available sources. That I wouldn't need to do any freedom of information requests, or I wouldn't have to view 1 million pages of CIA documents and that sort of thing. I would say, okay, let's see if we can find it at a small college library or in the public library downtown, or books on interlibrary loan, reading such things as Who's Who in America, the entries in there, the entries in current biography, the National Encyclopedia of American Biography, the Dictionary of American Biography, contemporary authors, New York Times microfilm, things that are readily available. And if you use the book or an article of some kind, to make sure that it was from an allegedly respectable author and a respected publishing firm, and see if you could find the information. And I did indeed find some revealing patterns a la Murray Rothbard. And I found that the Warren Commission was not a disinterested, bipartisan, blue ribbon commission. It was, in fact, Rothbardian straight down the line. I mean, it just fit like a glove. It was beautiful. It was an interlocking group with long-standing ties to one another and long-standing ties to all of the elements that we've been talking about here today: law, banking, finance, government, all within this milieu that we've heard already today about the welfare, warfare state. And certainly some of these folks are even architects of the present setup. The Warren Commission, as you know, rubber-stamped or placed on the assassination of John F. Kennedy the lone nut thesis. And they actually have gone back in time to help explain other presidential assassinations from that same point of view. So it's a very interesting thing. But you have to remember this. The plain and simple fact is that on the 22nd of November, John F. Kennedy, whether you like him or not, it's not the question, was murdered in broad daylight, in full view of hundreds, actually recorded on film. And if anything, this fits the whole idea that Lou Rockwell this morning says that there are cracks in the edifice. And that was the problem. There were people who were concerned that the murder of the president may cause the welfare-warfare state to come apart. And that seems to be, certainly was, where the Warren Commission fit in. Let's make sure this edifice stays together. And they're doing this. The president is killed basically on a weekend. By the following weekend, the Warren Commission is in place. And we'll see these folks in an almost desperate effort to control the damage. Now, we're just going to try to go through each one. And I did a version of this with Clyde Wilson's Red Shirt Reading Circle in Columbia. And I went an hour and a half. And it was getting late. You know, we just had a huge Greek dinner, and people were... Hurry up. Let's start with John J. McCloy. We'll see some pictures of him in a minute. It became clear that the leading character in the Warren Commission was not Earl Warren. In fact, Earl Warren is more like Slick Earl than the great justice that he's made out to be. The central figure is John J. McCloy, a man who was sort of a lifelong wise man. He was a wise man in later years. Robert Caro maintains that Lyndon Johnson was known in his youth as a professional son, in that he courted older men and women of power. John J. McCloy was sort of a professional protege, and we'll see where he works out. Born in Philadelphia in 1895, has the prep school experience, attends Amherst, incidentally, during the period when the takeover in academe by socialists was at its heyday. He was at Amherst under the presidency of a man named Alexander Meiklejohn, who dismissed members of the faculty and replaced them with younger men who were socialists, who had come from Germany studying the socialist tradition. McCloy goes to Harvard Law School. He was studying under Felix Frankfurter. And you hear about Felix Frankfurter, and there are people who have written that Frankfurter was basically the leader of a Marxist cell at Harvard and did everything he could to forward the sort of Fabian socialist idea. World War I, John J. McCloy was captain of field artillery. His bio makes great play of his meeting Wild Bill Donovan as a young military officer. Comes back from World War I, joins the Cadwallader, Wickersham, and Taft law firm. We heard a piece on William Howard Taft. This was Henry Taft, the brother of William Howard. So it's a well-connected Wall Street firm. George Wickersham, the leading partner, was one of the founders of the Council on Foreign Relations that many of us have heard of. Incidentally, every reference I have to the CFR in the work that I've been doing is from a mainstream source, not a so-called conspiracy-style source. He joins the Cravath firm a little bit later on, and the Cravath firm was led by Paul Cravath, another founder of the Council on Foreign Relations and the man who helped fund the journal Foreign Affairs when it was first started in the early 1920s. And McCloy sort of gravitates toward them, and they show him the ropes, and with the Cravath firm, he becomes a serious talent scout for talented young attorneys and talented people in other areas. During World War II, as Assistant Secretary of War, we'll see a picture of him in a little bit as Assistant Secretary, and his specialty basically was espionage and security and that sort of thing. Just a tremendous figure. Rothbard describes Secretary of War Henry Stimson as a frail reed and maintains that McCloy was the man who handled the day-to-day business of the War Department. After World War II, he becomes a partner in the Milbank Tweed law firm in New York. It's another Wall Street firm. The leading partner was a man named E. Parmalee Prentice, who was the son-in-law of John D. Rockefeller. A very interesting group of people. With the Cravath firm, McCloy is the big lawyer for the Kuhn Loeb interests, and he comes back after World War II, works for the Rockefellers. He leaves Wall Street and becomes the military governor of Germany. He's a military governor and high commissioner of Germany from 1949 to 1952, and he took with him as vice commissioner a man named Benjamin Buttenweiser, who was a Kuhn Loeb partner. Again, after coming back from Germany, he takes a job with the Chase Manhattan Bank and is very closely associated with the Rockefeller interest for the rest of his career. McCloy actually served in the Kennedy administration. He was the arms control chief, the arms control and negotiation chief. And it's not well known, but there was a dispute in the fall of 1961 over the Russians cheating on the treaty. And Jack Kennedy basically said that I feel under no obligation to stick to the treaty, so we're going to test ourselves. And McCloy quit in disgust. And so he had basically a falling out with Kennedy that's not very well known. Again, a lifelong internationalist and well-known pragmatist. Earl Warren, again, not what you think. Several of the members of the Warren Commission have public images that are very carefully crafted. His image is that of the solemn, learned judge, and his career was anything but that. Born in 1891, went to law school at the University of California. His first job right before World War I, excuse me, was as a lawyer in the legal department of an outfit known as Associated Oil in San Francisco. Associated Oil was owned by Southern Pacific Railroad. Southern Pacific Railroad was owned by John D. Rockefeller, basically. Warren was a career politician, Alameda County DA, California Attorney General, Governor of California, vice presidential candidate on the 1948 Dewey ticket. When he ran for Attorney General, he filed as a Democrat and a Republican. I've never seen anything like it. This is slick Earl. I mean, one of the things McCloy did as Assistant Secretary of War was set up the internment of Japanese citizens. And that was Warren's thing, too. Warren was said to be one of the first to suggest rounding up Japanese citizens, or Japanese civilians, American citizens, some of them, and putting them in camps. So 20 years before the Warren Commission, he and McCloy have a very, very solid connection. He's described as this, as a politician. Years ago, Warren was singled out for future political favor by the most powerful industrial and political cliques in California. His record on most major social and economic issues is an almost perfect blank. It's 1944. Allen Dulles, gentleman's spy. Never see him without his pipe. Fairly well connected as well. His grandfather was John Foster, Secretary of State under Benjamin Harrison. His uncle was Robert Lansing, Secretary of State under Wilson, who took the assignment after William Jennings Bryan quit on a point of principle. Born in 1893, educated in Paris, Princeton BA, Princeton MA in International Affairs in 1916, heads out to Vienna as a Foreign Service officer. Sadly, no evidence that he came into contact with the Austrian school, as you could well imagine. 1919, he was actually on the staff of Edward M. House of the House Inquiry fame, close advisor to Woodrow Wilson. Goes to Berlin as an embassy employee in 1920. His Wall Street experience was with the Sullivan and Cromwell firm, and his major client was the J. Henry Schroeder banking firm, which is a German bank with Rockefeller connections. Allen Dulles and McCloy met while working in Paris. Their law firms handled the transactions that were basically the Young Plan and the Dawes Plan, the financing of German debt during the interwar period. And
they spent a lot of time in Europe together, knew each other very well for many, many years. Allen Dulles helped organize the OSS. He drafted the legislation himself for the CIA, became the director when his brother John Foster Dulles was the Secretary of State. And he has a well-known falling out with Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs situation, and ironically ends up judging Kennedy's assassin just 2 or 3 years later. Some Southerners on this Warren Commission were Richard Russell, John Sherman Cooper, and Hale Boggs. We'll look at them as well. Richard Russell was a lifelong politician, never married, basically spent his entire adult life just about from 1933 until his death in 1971 in the Senate. Quote, considered one of the most powerful men in the U.S. Senate, a master of parliamentary maneuvers, a formidable debater, a leading congressional advocate of a strong military stance. So a very solid warfare state. They say he had some differences of opinion on the welfare portion of it, but not too much. Wore two hats. Took a decidedly segregationist position for the benefits of the voters back home, but was a decidedly internationalist, bipartisan power broker in Washington, D.C., described as Lyndon Johnson's man on the Warren Commission. John Sherman Cooper, probably one of the more enigmatic figures in American history, at least in my opinion, who was very refined, very cultured man, a Republican at a time when it was almost unheard of, and he sort of portrayed a cracker, hayseed image to his benefit. Would go back home and make rant about integration and desegregation, and would come back and work with the internationalist community. Described as an able and vigorous supporter of a bipartisan foreign policy. He has a McCloy connection, I think, in that he was a lawyer, Harvard Law School, Yale, graduated from Yale in 1923, most likely to succeed at Yale, and incredible stuff. Goes to Harvard Law School, serves in the government, the American military occupation of Germany as a lawyer, and his specialty was helping to rewrite the Constitution of Bavaria and helping people being repatriated or who had been displaced. So very solid connection, I think. One of the first Republicans to oppose Joe McCarthy and such things as that. So an interesting situation. Again, played up his hayseed image. Even his New York Times obituary did this. They talked about his funny accent and all this, and I found that he was one of the attendants or partygoers at Truman Capote's 1966 black and white ball. I mean, this was the high society event of the decade, and there's John Sherman Cooper. So he's probably not a hayseed, I can tell you that. Gerald Ford, let's look at Hale Boggs very quickly. Hale Boggs' entire career was as a power broker in the House. He was involved in an outfit called the Interparliamentary Union. He was big on the Marshall Plan. He helped draft legislation for NATO. His pet project was the New Orleans Trade Mart. Yeah, anybody tell me who the director of the New Orleans Trade Mart was? Clay Shaw. He was friends with Clay Shaw, friends with Jim Garrison. Gerald Ford, we're going to look at some pictures here in a minute. Gerald Ford had an image as well. I grew up basically watching Saturday Night Live, watched Chevy Chase do Gerald Ford. What does he do? He falls down, he acts like a moron. This guy graduated from the University of Michigan, was a star on national championship football teams. He was one of the 4 blocks of granite. I mean, this guy is incredible. He goes to Yale Law School. I mean, morons don't graduate from Yale Law School. I mean, it's just plain and simple. I think his connection with McCloy came in 1940. In his biography, he talks about going to Washington, D.C. It's going to be down in New York from New Haven to help with the Wendell Willkie campaign. And McCloy's biographer maintains that the central office of the Wilkie campaign was John J. McCloy's office at the Cravath firm. So, and here's a guy that's looking for new talent. He's looking for young men that he can bring along, and they urge Jerry Ford to run for Congress against a known isolationist in 1948. So, it's a very interesting connection. Hale Boggs, incidentally, died mysteriously. Died in 1962. October 16th, 1972, while campaigning with Congressman Paul Begich. Let's see, what does the Kennedy assassination tell us about the presidency? Fierce competition for control of the executive branch, plain and simple. Violence is an integral part of the American political mosaic, certainly. The necessity for maintaining the facade of legitimacy. If you've watched the recent releases of the Assassination Records Review Board, that's exactly what they're trying to do. And they have put their report out, and they say there are no smoking guns. All right, let's look at some slides here. John J. McCloy and Robert Lovett. They were both Assistant Secretaries of War. Henry Stimson called them the imps of Satan. And I don't think he was joking. Lovett helped put the Kennedy cabinet together. Lovett selected Dean Rusk and Maxwell Taylor to be the military advisor. Both Dean Rusk and Maxwell Taylor had been socked away in Rockefeller-paid sinecures or sinecures that went straight from Rockefeller employment to the Kennedy administration. John J. McCloy as chairman of the Chase. And that's young David there. The other two gentlemen are George Champion and Stuart Baker. And I can't find any information on them, or haven't yet. John J. McCloy, Harry Truman, and Dean Acheson. John Sherman Cooper joined the Dean Acheson law firm of Covington and Burling later on. I mean, you don't hire hayseed goofballs to be members of those kinds of firms, trust me. Would you buy a used car from these men? I don't think so. David Rockefeller, a tad bit older. Richard Nixon during his period as being groomed as elder statesman. And John J. McCloy probably in his late 80s. John J. McCloy and Jimmy Carter. Well, what's your name again? There he is, Jack. God bless him. John J. McCloy, advisor, wise man. Looks like they got some kind of Oval Office taping device there. I don't know. Here it is, folks. The New York Times, the day after Kennedy's murder. And all this is contrived again to keep the edifice from completely coming down, I think. Lou really, I think, hit it on the head early this morning. I think that Nixon probably was the first crack in the edifice. This passed, okay? John J. McCloy, John Sherman Cooper, and a young man named David Bellin, who has created a cottage industry in writing the final revelation from the Warren Commission several times. Mostly hogwash, mostly designed to steer you in the direction away from viewing the Warren Commission itself. Almost no assassination conspiracy material deals with these people. They deal with the report, which is 80% of the American public thinks it's balderdash anyway. And that's Dealey Plaza. That's the Texas School Book Depository, and there's John Sherman Cooper. It's interesting. Whenever they photograph these guys outside, they have on these wonderful hats. It's like my dad used to wear. There they are, handing over the report. Sunlight streaming in. Our learned judge handing the thing to Lyndon. There's John Jay on the far left. Richard Russell, Gerald Ford, Allen Dulles in the bow tie, John Sherman Cooper in the glasses, and Hale Boggs on the far right there. Incidentally, should be on the other side, but they all knew each other. Cokie Roberts is the daughter of Hale Boggs, and she's written a book, and she says basically that Gerald Ford was a house guest. They were over the house the whole time. Hale Boggs had a garden. People would come over and have squash, and some watermelon and all, whatever, beans and corn from his garden. And there's the report. See, that's supposed to be enough there. That's supposed to be, man, look how thick that is. That's got to be true. That's J. Lee Rankin in the background, Solicitor General under Earl Warren. Lots and lots of connections we just can't go into here, but maybe we'll see something in print soon. There it is. That's supposed to do it, folks. That's supposed to keep your edifice from crumbling. An official portrait, solemn men. We find him guilty. Look what it says. Warren Commission finds Oswald guilty. Well, who are they? Is this a jury? Is this a court of law? This is an extrajudicial thing, an extra governmental thing. And that did it. That was supposed to be enough right there. And I think 35 years later, they have just this year put out the report of the Assassination Records Review Board, and they have rubber stamped this, just saying that they were a little bit too zealous in their secrecy. That's all they said. So we still got it. What's the presidency? Again, a hotly fought over prize, a hotly sought after key to the executive branch. And there's some suggestion here that even the president himself is not the true leader. 5 minutes. Thank you. I'm done, really. We're going to finish early instead of late. Thank you very much. Bring the lights up.